Some moments split time into before and after, the kind where everything you thought you knew about yourself shatters in the space between heartbeats, and what remains is raw truth, too powerful to deny or hide. For King Theon, who'd spent 3 centuries building walls around his heart and maintaining perfect royal composure through wars and betrayals and the slow erosion of immortal loneliness, that moment came when he heard the whistle of an arrow aimed at his back and felt a body slam into him from the side. Not the arrow's impact, a person, someone throwing themselves between him and death. The arrow hit with a sickening thud, and Theon turned to see Iris, his quiet maid who'd worked in his quarters for 2 years without ever drawing attention to herself, crumpling to the marble floor with a crossbow bolt buried deep in her shoulder. Blood spread across her plain uniform in a crimson stain that seemed impossible, too much, too fast. And something in Theon that had been locked away for centuries tore open. The sound that came from him wasn't royal or composed or remotely human. It was the howl of a wolf who just lost something irreplaceable. The cry shook the castle walls and shattered every window in the throne room, and nobles would later say they'd never heard anything so raw and terrible and heartbroken in their entire lives. Iris had been invisible for most of her 25 years. The middle child of 7 in a poor family from the outer districts, she'd learned early that not being noticed was often the safest strategy. Her older siblings were bold and loud, constantly getting into trouble. Her younger siblings were cute and coddled, drawing attention effortlessly. Iris was the quiet one who did her chores without complaint, who mediated fights between siblings, who somehow always knew what needed doing before anyone asked. Her parents appreciated her reliability, but never quite saw her.
She was the child who made everything work smoothly enough that they could focus on louder, needier children. At 16, she'd taken a position as a junior maid in a merchant household to ease her family's financial burden. She was good at the work, efficient and thorough, the kind of servant who anticipated needs and solved problems before they became visible. She worked her way up through several households, each position slightly better than the last, until at 23, she secured a placement in the royal palace. Not prestigious work, just general cleaning and maintenance, but the pay was stable and the quarters were clean. She'd been assigned to the king's private wing 2 years ago when the previous maid retired. It was supposed to be a step up, high-profile position with better wages, but it also meant working for King Theon, the immortal beast king who had a reputation for being cold and distant and impossible to please. Iris approached the position with her usual strategy. Stay quiet, do excellent work, don't draw attention. For 2 years, it worked perfectly. She cleaned the king's quarters every morning while he attended council meetings. She ensured his personal items were organized, his clothing maintained, his space comfortable. She never spoke unless spoken to, never lingered, never tried to engage him in conversation. She was furniture that happened to be human, exactly what the role required. What she didn't expect was to start caring about him. Not romantically, at least not at first. Just noticing small things. The way he looked exhausted every morning, like sleep didn't actually restore him. The books he read about loneliness and connection despite having hundreds of people around him constantly. The way he'd stand at his window staring out at the city with an expression that was profoundly, achingly alone. Iris wasn't supposed to notice those things, but she had 7 siblings and a lifetime of reading people to survive. She saw what others missed. The immortal king who seemed untouchable was desperately, quietly drowning in isolation. She started doing small things, nothing obvious or presumptuous, just adjustments that might help. She began opening the curtains before he returned, so natural light filled the space instead of oppressive darkness. She left books she thought he'd enjoy on his reading table, always with a bookmark so it looked like they'd been there a while rather than deliberately placed. She adjusted the temperature in his quarters because she'd noticed he always seemed cold despite it being warm. She moved his favorite chair slightly so he could see both the fireplace and the window without having to choose. Theon noticed. How could he not?
But he never said anything, just accepted Bee's small kindnesses from a maid who thought she was being subtle. He found himself looking forward to returning to his quarters, to seeing what tiny improvement Iris had made. Fresh flowers in a particular vase, his correspondence organized by priority, a specific tea blend waiting that somehow matched his mood. She never took credit, never drew attention to herself, just quietly made his private space the one place in the entire palace that felt like home instead of a museum. He started timing his morning departures to cross paths with her, would ask casual questions about her family, her life. She answered politely but minimally, clearly uncomfortable with attention. So he stopped pushing, content to just have her presence, even if she wouldn't engage beyond professional courtesy. What Theon didn't know was that Iris had started dreaming about him, not the king, but the person underneath, the one who looked so tired and alone. She'd wake up from dreams where she could somehow ease that loneliness and feel embarrassed because she was a maid with no business dreaming about royalty. She tried to maintain distance, to remember her place. But then she'd see him standing at that window with that expression, and her heart would break a little more. She couldn't fix the big things, the centuries of isolation and the weight of immortal rule, but she could make his private space comfortable. She could ensure he had small pleasures to look forward to. It wasn't much, but it was what she could offer. She never imagined she'd end up offering her life. The assassination attempt came during a routine day. Theon had returned from council meetings earlier than usual, frustrated with noble posturing and political games. Iris was still in his quarters, had been rearranging his bookshelves because she'd noticed he kept reaching for volumes on the top shelf, and his reaching looked painful. She was on a stepladder when he entered. Startled, she turned too quickly. The stepladder wobbled, and she would have fallen if Theon hadn't crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her. For several seconds, they stood frozen.
His hands steadying her waist, her hands braced on his shoulders, faces inches apart. Close enough that Iris could see gold flecks in his eyes and count his eyelashes. Close enough that Theon could smell lavender and sunshine in her hair and feel how rapidly her heart was beating. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. The moment stretched impossibly, and Iris felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't a distant king she felt sympathy for. This was a man whose touch made her skin burn and whose proximity made rational thought impossible. Theon felt it too, this sudden awareness that the invisible maid he'd been watching for 2 years was actually the most present person in his life, that her quiet care had been slowly healing wounds he'd stopped believing could heal, that somewhere between fresh flowers and adjusted temperatures, he'd fallen in love with someone who thought she was invisible. He was about to say something, anything to acknowledge this impossible moment, when he caught movement in his peripheral vision. The window. Someone on the rooftop across the courtyard. Weapon raised. Crossbow aimed directly at him. Time slowed. Theon's instincts, honed by 3 centuries of survival, screamed at him to move. But he was still holding Iris, and moving meant she'd fall, and some part of him couldn't bear the thought of her getting hurt. That hesitation cost him half a second. Half a second was all it took for Iris to see the same threat, to process what was happening, and to make a choice that would change everything. She twisted in his arms and shoved him with all her strength, using the stepladder as leverage. Theon stumbled backward, his 300-year-old reflexes no match for the surprise of being pushed by someone who weighed maybe 110 pounds. He hit the floor hard, wind knocked out of him, confused and disoriented. Then he heard the whistle, the arrow's flight, and the impact. Not the solid thunk of arrow hitting wall or furniture, the wet, terrible sound of metal piercing flesh. Iris stood where he'd been standing a second before, the crossbow bolt buried in her left shoulder, too close to her heart, definitely hitting something vital. Her face registered shock more than pain. She looked down at the arrow shaft protruding from her body like she couldn't quite process that it was real. Then her legs gave out. Theon moved faster than thought, caught her before she hit the floor, cradled her against his chest. His hands came away red with her blood, so much blood it couldn't possibly be survivable. Iris looked up at him with eyes that were already starting to glaze with shock. "Had to," she whispered, voice wet and struggling. Couldn't let them. The arrow had been aimed at his heart, would have killed him, maybe, or at least injured him badly enough to make him vulnerable. She'd known that in the split second she had to decide. Had thrown herself into the shot's path without hesitation or calculation. Had chosen his life over hers, like it wasn't even a question. Theon felt something inside him break. Not crack or chip, but completely shatter. 300 years of careful emotional control, of maintaining distance to avoid pain, of convincing himself he was fine alone. All of it disintegrated in the face this woman bleeding out in his arms because she decided he was worth dying for. The sound that tore from him wasn't voluntary. It came from somewhere primal and ancient, the place where his wolf lived and his humanity struggled to contain it. A howl of grief and rage and desperation, so powerful it became physical force. The windows in his quarters exploded outward. The ones in the throne room 3 floors down shattered simultaneously. The sound wave rippled through the palace, breaking glass and cracking stone and making every person within earshot drop to their knees from the sheer emotional weight of it. In the courtyard, the assassin who'd fired the shot stumbled backward, lost their footing, and fell from the rooftop. Theon's guards were already moving, but the assassin was dead before they reached the body. The king's cry had killed them, stopped their heart through sheer force of will and magic and grief. Theon didn't notice or care. His entire world had narrowed to the woman in his arms, whose blood was soaking through his clothes and whose breathing was getting shallower with each second. He pressed his hand over the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. Felt the warm pulse of her blood against his palm. Felt her heartbeat weakening. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice breaking. "Iris, please. You don't get to do this. You don't get to save me and then leave." Her eyes focused on him with effort. "Worth it," she whispered. "You were worth it." Then her eyes closed and her body went limp. Theon screamed for healers, for anyone who could help, his voice still carrying that supernatural resonance that made people move without thinking. The royal physician arrived within seconds, took one look at the wound and the amount of blood loss, and his face went pale. "Your Majesty, this is—" "Fix it," Theon snarled, still cradling Iris. "I don't care what it costs or what you have to do. Fix her." The physician began working, barking orders at assistants who materialized with supplies. They had to move Iris to a proper medical facility, but Theon refused to let her go. He carried her himself through corridors filled with shocked servants and curious nobles, his clothes soaked with her blood, his face showing more emotion than anyone had seen in decades. The medical wing became a controlled chaos, physicians working frantically while Theon stood in the corner, unable to look away, his hands still stained red. The head physician,
Master Aldrich, approached him carefully. "Your Majesty, you should clean up, get some rest. We'll do everything we can. I'm staying. She stays in my sight until I know she's going to survive." Aldrich studied the king with concern. The arrow hit her subclavian artery. She's lost a catastrophic amount of blood. Even with magic and skill, her chances are maybe 30%. We'll know in the next few hours whether she makes it. Theon felt his wolf surge under his skin, threatening to break free. Then make it 100%. Use whatever magic necessary. Take it from me if you need to. I'll give her my immortality if that's what it costs. You can't transfer immortality, Aldrich said gently. The magic doesn't work that way. Then figure out something that does work, because I'm not accepting any outcome where she dies. The desperation in his voice was raw enough that Aldrich didn't argue further, just returned to his patient and worked with renewed intensity.
Theon stood vigil for 6 hours, didn't sit, didn't eat, didn't acknowledge the various nobles and advisors who tried to speak to him, just watched Iris, lying pale and still on the medical table while physicians fought for her life. Lady Seraphina, his chief advisor, finally cornered him. "Your Majesty, the council needs you. We need to discuss security breaches and response protocols. Later, this is a matter of national importance. So is this." He didn't take his eyes off Iris. "She took an arrow meant for me. She's dying because of me. Nothing else matters until I know she's going to survive." Seraphina's expression softened slightly. "You care about her. More than I knew I was capable of. More than I've let myself care about anyone in 300 years. And I never told her, because I was afraid of exactly this, losing someone I love. Now she might die never knowing that she's the most important person in my world." "Then you should tell her," Seraphina said quietly. "The moment she wakes up. Assuming she wakes up, she will. She has to, because the alternative was unthinkable." The turning point came at hour 8, when Iris's heartbeat, which had been thready and irregular, suddenly stabilized. Her color improved from deathly pale to merely very pale. Master Aldrich checked her vitals 3 times before allowing himself a small smile. "She's going to make it. The crisis has passed. She'll need weeks of recovery, and the shoulder will never be at full strength, but she'll survive." Theon's knees gave out. He caught himself on the wall. Relief so powerful it was physical pain. He'd lived 300 years and survived countless dangers, but this 8-hour vigil had aged him more than centuries. "When can I see her?" "Soon. She's unconscious from blood loss and magic sedation. Probably won't wake until tomorrow at earliest. But Your Majesty, you should rest. You look like you're about to collapse." "I'll rest when I can sit beside her."
Aldrich knew better than to argue. They moved Iris to a private recovery room, and Theon took up position in the chair beside her bed. Someone brought him clean clothes. Someone else brought food he didn't touch. His personal guard established a perimeter, because apparently assassination attempts meant increased security. Theon ignored all of it. He took Iris's hand carefully, mindful of the bandages and injuries, and held on like she was the only thing tethering him to sanity. The court was in chaos. News of the assassination attempt had spread, along with significantly embellished versions of the king's reaction. Servants whispered about windows shattering across multiple floors. Nobles debated whether Theon's emotional display was appropriate or concerning. The general consensus seemed to be that the Beast King, famous for his emotional distance, had completely lost his composure over a maid. Lady Seraphina addressed it during an emergency council meeting. Theon refused to attend.
"The king has made his priorities clear. The maid who saved his life is under his direct protection. Anyone who questions this or attempts to minimize her sacrifice will answer to him personally. And trust me, you don't want that." "But it's inappropriate," Lord Pembroke protested. "She's a servant. His emotional attachment is concerning." "She threw herself in front of an arrow to save him. That's loyalty worth more than all your political maneuvering combined. If you can't respect that, you're in the wrong profession." The council grumbled but didn't push further. Nobody wanted to face Theon's wrath right now. Iris woke 30 hours after the arrow hit her. Her first sensation was pain, sharp and burning in her shoulder. Her second was warmth, specifically the warmth of someone holding her hand. She opened her eyes slowly, vision blurry and head foggy, focused gradually on the figure slumped in the chair beside her, King Theon, asleep sitting up. Still holding her hand like he'd been there for hours. He looked terrible, clothes wrinkled, hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. Nothing like the composed king she was used to seeing. "You look awful," she whispered, voice rough from disuse. Theon's eyes snapped open. He straightened immediately, hand tightening on hers. "You're awake. Thank God you're awake." She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain flared. "Easy," Theon said, helping her adjust pillows. You took an arrow through your shoulder, damaged your subclavian artery. You almost died. She remembered then, the crossbow, the split-second decision, the impact. You're alive, she said, relief in her voice. That's what matters. Iris, you nearly died. Do you understand that? You threw yourself in front of an assassin's arrow. You could have been killed. But I wasn't, and you're safe. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. His expression cracked. Why? Why would you do that? Because she struggled to articulate something she didn't fully understand herself. Because the thought of you dying was worse than the thought of me dying. Because in that split second, I couldn't imagine a world where you weren't in it. Because I've spent 2 years watching you be lonely and trying to make things easier in the only way I could, and letting you get killed seemed like the worst possible failure. Theon's eyes were wet. You stupid, brave, impossible woman. I've spent 300 years keeping distance because I was afraid of exactly this. Afraid of caring about someone and losing them, and you just threw yourself in front of an arrow without hesitation. Do you have any idea what these past 30 hours have been like? Thinking I might lose you before I ever told you? Told me what? That I love you. He said it like the words were being torn out of him. That I've been falling in love with you for months, maybe years.
That you've made my quarters feel like home and my life feel less empty just by being in it. That you see me, really see me, and instead of being horrified by what you see, you care. That I've been terrified of acknowledging any of this because immortals and mortals don't get happy endings. And now you nearly died saving me, and I realized I don't care about the complications, or the timing, or the fact that I'm a king and you're a maid. I just care about you being alive and knowing that you matter more than anything. Iris felt tears slide down her cheeks. I thought I was invisible. I thought I was just furniture in your life. You were never invisible. You were the most visible thing in my... Kissed her knuckles gently. These past hours, thinking I might lose you, were the worst of my 3-century life. Please don't ever do that to me again. She smiled despite the pain. Can't promise that.
If someone aims another arrow at you, I'm absolutely going to get in the way. He laughed, the sound broken and relieved. Then I guess I'll have to make sure nobody ever gets the chance. He stood carefully, leaned over the bed, and kissed her forehead with devastating gentleness. When you're recovered, we're having a serious conversation about appropriate ways to express concern for my well-being, ones that don't involve nearly dying. Looking forward to it. Good. He settled back in the chair, still holding her hand. Now rest. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. You're stuck with me now. She closed her eyes, feeling safe despite everything. Stuck with an immortal king. Could be worse. Could be worse, he agreed quietly. Could be so much worse. The recovery period was long and difficult. The shoulder wound healed slowly, complicated by the arterial damage and amount of blood loss. Iris spent 3 weeks in the medical wing, and Theon visited every single day.
Usually staying for hours, they talked about everything. Her childhood with 7 siblings, his 3 centuries of rule, her dreams of someday having a small house with a garden, his fear of connection because everyone he'd ever loved had died. The more they talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't sudden attraction born from crisis. This was something that had been building for years. 2 lonely people finding solace in each other's presence without realizing what was happening. The court noticed, of course. Speculation ran wild about the king's attachment to his injured maid. Lady Seraphina tried to manage it, but there was only so much she could do when Theon spent more time in the medical wing than in council meetings. 3 weeks into recovery,
Master Aldrich cleared Iris to move to private quarters for continued rest. Theon immediately offered his guest suite, the most comfortable rooms in the palace aside from his own. Iris protested. "That's too much. I can return to the servant quarters." "Absolutely not. You're recovering from a near-fatal injury sustained protecting me. You'll have proper accommodations and whatever care you need. This isn't negotiable." She learned quickly that Theon was stubborn when he decided something mattered, so she moved into the guest suite, which was more luxury than she'd experienced in her entire life, and continued healing. Her family visited, overwhelmed by the royal attention and their daughter's sudden elevation in status. Her siblings were excited and loud, asking endless questions. Her parents were nervous, clearly uncomfortable in palace surroundings. Theon met them all, was gracious and kind, and made it clear their daughter was being honored as a hero. After they left, Iris cried from the overwhelming strangeness of everything. A month ago, she'd been invisible furniture. Now she was recovering in a royal guest suite, while a king declared his love. Theon found her crying and immediately worried he'd done something wrong. "What happened? Are you in pain?" "No," she wiped her eyes. This is all so strange. A month ago, I was nobody. Now I'm acknowledging what I should have acknowledged months ago." He sat beside her carefully. "Iris, I know this is overwhelming. I know the court is watching and judging, but I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this because you saved my life, though I'm grateful beyond words. I'm doing this because you were already important before the arrow. You just gave me an undeniable reason to stop being a coward about admitting it." She looked at this immortal king who'd spent 300 years alone and was now choosing her. "What happens now?" "Now you finish healing, then we figure out what you want. If you want to return to your life, I'll support that. If you want something different, we'll figure that out together."
And if you're asking whether I'm going to pursue this connection between us, the answer is yes. Absolutely, with your permission. She thought about the impossible complications, the court gossip, the vast difference in their statuses, the fact that he'd live forever and she wouldn't. Then she thought about running into danger to save him without hesitation, and realized fear was a terrible reason to avoid something that mattered. Permission granted. He smiled, genuine and relieved. "Thank God, because I've spent the past month terrified you'd tell me to leave you alone. Not a chance." She took his hand. "You're stuck with me now, remember? Best promise I've ever received." The next 6 months transformed both their lives. Iris completed her physical recovery, though the shoulder remained permanently weakened. She couldn't return to maid duties even if she'd wanted to, which she didn't. Theon created a new position for her, personal companion to the king, which was essentially making official what had been developing naturally. She attended court functions at his side, joined him for meals, sat in on council meetings, where her common-sense perspective proved valuable. The nobles initially resisted, but Theon made it clear opposition was futile. "Iris has saved my life and earned every privilege I grant her. You will treat her with respect or find employment elsewhere." Gradually, most of the court came to accept her. Not everyone was happy about it, but competence and genuine kindness won over even skeptics. And Iris was competent. She learned quickly, asked smart questions, and brought perspectives that improved policy discussions. What started as scandal became grudging respect, and eventually genuine acceptance. The relationship between Theon and Iris deepened naturally. They spent every evening together, talking or reading or just enjoying comfortable silence. Physical intimacy developed slowly, carefully, both of them aware of the weight this carried. When they finally crossed that line, it felt inevitable and right. Theon had loved before, centuries ago, but nothing that felt like this. Iris was his first everything, and she approached it with the same quiet competence she brought to everything else. 6 months after the arrow, Theon made his decision. He called a full court assembly and announced his intention to marry Iris, not as political alliance or obligation, but as genuine choice. The court had mixed reactions, but nobody dared protest openly.
The wedding was planned for 3 months out, giving time for preparation and allowing Iris to learn everything she'd need as queen. The training was intense, but she handled it with determination. She'd survived an assassin's arrow. She could survive etiquette lessons and diplomatic protocol. The wedding day arrived with sunshine and celebration. Iris wore a dress that honored both her humble background and her new role. She walked down the aisle alone because this was her choice to make, nobody else's. Theon waited at the altar, looking nervous and happy, and more human than most people had ever seen him. When they exchanged vows, Iris added her own words. "I spent 2 years trying to be invisible in your life, trying to help without being seen. You taught me that being seen isn't something to fear, but something to embrace. Today, I choose visibility. I choose partnership. I choose you, knowing all the complications and impossibilities, because some things are worth the risk." Theon's vows were equally personal. "You threw yourself in front of an arrow without hesitation, gave me proof that genuine love still exists. Today I choose you not because you saved my life, but because you saw my loneliness and tried to ease it, because you made my private space feel like home, because you're the first person in 300 years who makes immortality feel like a blessing instead of a curse. I choose you completely." Eternally, gratefully. When the crown was placed on Iris's head, she felt the weight of it physically and metaphorically. But Theon was beside her, and together the weight was bearable. The years that followed proved their choice right. Iris transformed how the palace treated servants, implementing protections and improvements based on her own experience. She made the court more accessible to common people, ensuring the crown heard voices beyond nobility. Theon supported every initiative, learning to see his kingdom through her eyes. They ruled as partners, their different perspectives creating balanced governance. 10 years into their marriage, they returned to the room where the assassination attempt had happened. The window had been replaced, the bloodstains cleaned, but the memory remained sharp. "Do you regret it?" Theon asked. "Taking that arrow? The permanent shoulder damage?" Iris flexed her shoulder, feeling the familiar ache. "Not for a second. You were worth it. All of this was worth it." He pulled her close, mindful of the old injury. "That moment, watching you fall, was the worst of my 300-year life. Hearing your heart stop nearly killed me." "I know." She kissed him gently. "But I didn't die. We got our happy ending. Against all odds. Against all reason." She smiled. "The best things usually are." They stood together in the room where everything changed. The maid who took an arrow and the king whose cry shook castle walls, living proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is risk everything for what matters, that love worth having is worth dying for, and that sometimes being seen, really seen, is the greatest gift you can receive. If this story reminded you that real love means choosing each other despite the cost, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment with the word moon if you believe some people are worth any risk. Share this video with someone who needs to know that being invisible doesn't mean being worthless, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen. Thanks for watching, and remember, the scars we earn protecting what we love are proof we chose courage over safety, and that's always worth celebrating.